The Compliance Perspectives podcast is sponsored by Athenian, a leading provider of entity management and governance software. Get started at www.athenian.com. Welcome to the Compliance Perspectives podcast. I'm Adam Turteltaub from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics in Healthcare Compliance Association. Joining us today from Bloomington, Indiana, and the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University is Professor Todd Haugh, Associate Professor of Business Law and Ethics, Arthur M. Weimer Faculty Fellow in Business Law and Director of the Institute for Corporate Governance and Ethics, and Professor Suneal Bedi, Associate Professor of Business Law and Ethics, Jerome Best Faculty Fellow, and Research Director for the Institute for Corporate Governance and Ethics. And today we're going to be talking about an interesting article they wrote, Retheorizing Corporate Compliance, which appeared in the UC Davis Law Review. Professors, thanks for joining us. Todd, you think we are all thinking about compliance wrong, treating it like a defensive tool, not an offensive asset. Can you explain?
You bet, Adam. First of all, thanks so much for having us on the podcast. So, listen, Suneal and I have been engaged in kind of this long-running look at compliance and trying to rethink some of the fundamental, foundational components of it. And so, one of those is just the way that we think about compliance almost exclusively from a defensive posture. And what we mean by that is basically compliance from the very beginning, primarily, by most companies up until now, is looked at as a legal liability avoidance mechanism. Okay. And that's something I think most compliance officers and even scholars that are looking at compliance understand. We tend to think about it as we put a bunch of processes in place, we can guard against respondeat superior liability in case a regulator or prosecutor comes knocking at the door. And that is how compliance has been thought of primarily. There's a lot of value to that, of course, and there's different components to that defensive posture, but we also think that has hindered and held compliance back for quite a long time because it creates this sort of insurance policy mentality, this check the box mentality that we're all familiar with. And so what we want to do in this paper and what we've been trying to do in our past work is retheorize how we think about compliance, moving it from a defensive into an offensive posture.
For many, that's going to be a very different approach. Now, the two of you advocate for looking at non-market strategies. Suneal, can you explain a bit more about what they are?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. So one way to think about what we mean by offensive is, defensive would be protecting a company from legal liability, as Todd said. Offensive would be sort of utilizing compliance to gain a strategic advantage. So the idea is that can we use compliance to sort of take market share? Can we use compliance to harm our competitors, or at the very least, put ourselves in a better situation vis-a-vis our competitors? And what we use this sort of theory in business literature called non-market strategies to tease out the ways in which you can use compliance offensively. So what non-market strategies are simply kinds of business activities that corporations use all the time, but sort of activities that go beyond sort of standard business practices. Standard business practices would be, advertising your product or, doing R&D to make your product better. These would be sort of market strategies that improve the quality, the quantity, the efficiency by which you produce a product or market a product. Non-market strategies are ways you increase the competitiveness of your company, but use sort of public institutions. The idea is you can use the rules, the laws, the governing bodies in which you operate in order to actually make yourself more competitive. So these sorts of things are courts, regulators, statutes, even social norms. So, norms around ethics, norms around CSR. These are all sort of non-market institutions, public institutions that companies can utilize and sort of tap into in order to sort of make themselves more competitive, to take market share from competitors. And what we do is we sort of in the paper highlight how compliance can be used as this non-market strategy.
Interesting, and it does fit with sort of this broader trend of evaluating organizations beyond the P&L. Now, Todd, you outlined 3 of these strategies in the article. Let's go through them. First one is adaptive strategy. What is that exactly?
Yeah, an adaptive non-market strategy essentially leverages the kind of existing state of public institutions. So what the existing state of the law or legislature norms might be in order, and a company uses those in order to make themselves more competitive, gain more market share in the market. And so, we provide a couple examples in the paper. The one that we really like is between Microsoft, their acquisition of Activision Blizzard. And so, just a quick background on this. Microsoft, of course, is big in the gaming space. They're in this, long-term battle with Sony, trying to dominate that space in gaming. And they were always looking for acquisitions. Microsoft was. At the same time, Activision Blizzard, another gaming company, was having all kinds of compliance problems. So it was based on sexual harassment allegations within that organization. And so Microsoft, because Activision Blizzard was sort of in trouble, Microsoft made an offer to buy that company. Okay, now that's just sort of standard, market activity. But here's where our adaptive compliance component strategy comes in. In order for Microsoft to acquire Activision Blizzard, they had to get approval, antitrust approval. And so what they did in order to make that happen is they used that framework, the existing framework that regulators were using and looking at for an antitrust issue. And they started beefing up their compliance program. They started talking a lot about what they were doing related to, say, sexual harassment and a whole bunch of other compliance components. And so because of that, they timed that basically around the same time that they were trying to acquire Activision Blizzard. And ultimately, that was part of the thing that regulators looked at in order to allow that merger to go through. And so then what that does, of course, is that makes Microsoft stronger, and that hurts or potentially harms Sony, who they're engaged in with this sort of market competition. So that's an example of using existing laws, existing state of public institution and regulators in order to make yourself more competitive through compliance, beefing up your compliance.
Very strategic of Microsoft. So, Suneal, can you now tell us a little bit about the additive non-market strategy?
Yeah, so if adaptive non-market strategies utilize existing rules and regulations, additive market strategies, so obviously, sort of add rules and sort of regulations to sort of the existing public institutions. So the idea here is if companies can be at the forefront of compliance, they can sort of push beyond what is illegal or required, or sort of create new standards, then they can actually get a head start on companies. And one area where we see this is FINRA. So FINRA is the organization that regulates investment banks or regulates broker-dealer banks. And the way it's regulated is via self-regulatory organization, SRO. And the idea is that the people that regulate sort of or create the rules and laws that apply to broker-dealers are representatives of broker-dealers. So various broker-dealers, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, whatever it is, they sit on a board, these members of these companies, they sit on a board and create rules. And so you can imagine if it turns out your company or the company that you represent is at the leading edge of, say, something like privacy, holding your customers' data private, and you're at the leading edge, well, then you can sort of set the standard at that edge. You can set the standard as what you are doing. And if you're doing that, if you set that standard, and now this becomes the industry-wide standard, okay, you are in a better position than all your competitors who haven't invested sort of all the startup or fixed costs in order to get to that level. Meanwhile, and this is also relevant for FINRA, the board of FINRA also enforces the rules that it makes. So now not only can you as a company sort of, if you are at the leading edge of compliance, not only can you set that to be the standard and give yourself an advantage, but you can also be the person that's enforcing sort of that standard. And you can imagine those two things coming together. If you are a leading edge company on the leading edge of compliance, that can absolutely help you sort of increase costs for your competitors that you have already borne, therefore giving you a competitive advantage in the marketplace.
That's very revolutionary thinking. Finally, can you give us an overview of the transformative non-market strategy?
Yeah, so transformative non-market strategies, again, if we say adaptive as using existing, adding as sort of additive as sort of adding, transformative seems to transform. It seeks to transform the existing sort of rules and regulations to benefit a company. And here what we see is you see lobbying. Lobbying is a very, very classic non-market strategy. And we don't sort of take a position on whether lobbying is good or bad. I think people have different sort of perspectives on that. We simply say that if you have you're a company that is at the leading edge of environmental sustainability, let's say, well, you have eradicated all chlorofluorocarbons, right? Well, your competitors haven't. Well, if you can lobby a legislature to pass laws that actually make it illegal to have the CFCs that you have already gotten rid of, okay, now you are in a position that is much, much better than your competitors. You've already invested, you've already done all the processes to get rid of sort of potentially a hazardous chemical that now when the laws change, you've anticipated it, but not just anticipated it, you've actually had a hand in changing the law in your favor.
Well, Professors Bedi and Haugh, thank you so much for investing your time in thinking this through and sharing it with us today. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I'm Adam Turteltaub from SCCE and HCCA. I hope we're able to expand your compliance perspective.